God sees you. God sees me. He knows our needs. He knows the things that we need to survive: food, wealth, housing, relationships. But that is not where our focus should be. These things all come naturally if we don't focus on them, if we don't look at ourselves, but instead we look towards other people and we look towards God. Welcome back to the Sermon on the Mount, Part 7. God sees you. Today we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 6, 19 to 34. In the beginning of this chapter, Jesus starts off by saying, don't waste your time with temporary things. Don't focus on the temporary things of this earth, things that rust, things that waste away, things that degrade and devalue. These are not where our focus is meant to be. Instead, we're meant to be focusing on eternal matters. We're meant to be focusing on things that will last forever. And this is how Jesus sets the stage for the rest of his sermon here. It's not about food and drink. It's not about our houses and our cars and our toys and our stuff. What we want to be doing is we want to be looking towards treasures in heaven, storing up treasures in heaven. And then Jesus, he starts talking about good eyes and bad eyes, and a good eye being like a light to your whole body and all these sorts of things. And this is where I usually get lost, because it seems very disconnected with what he's just been talking about when it comes to storing up treasures in heaven and all these sorts of things. But actually it's not. It's just, we need to understand what Jesus is talking about when he talks about a good eye and a bad eye and all these sorts of things. And it doesn't match neatly with our culture. These are not phrases that we use. See, if you look at what it means to have a good eye and what it means to have a bad eye in more ancient cultures, what they're really talking about is they're talking about generosity. You see, a good eye is an eye that sees the needs of other people. A good eye is an eye that will see someone's need and will want to do something about it. And so a good eye is actually talking about someone who is generous. Whereas a bad eye is like someone who is short-sighted. All they see is themselves. And so when Jesus talks about a good eye being a light to your whole body, what he's really saying is he's saying that when you see the needs of other people, when you are generous, then you will understand your own needs properly as well. But if you are short-sighted, if you only see yourself and you do not see other people, well, what ends up happening is you don't actually see yourself clearly either. Your vision of yourself is dim. That light that you think you have, that perception you think you have of yourself, is actually not very accurate either. So we're told not to be blinded by temporary things. And this is why Jesus says you cannot serve both God and money. You will love one more than the other, and you will resent the other. And this is what happens. See, if we're focused on all of our material needs, if we're only looking at ourselves, if we're only worrying about our current position, what ends up happening is we miss the big picture. By default, if we're focusing on money and finances, if that is our goal, then material things naturally become our goal. We end up not seeing ourselves properly, not seeing our situations properly, not seeing the needs of others that are around us. And when we do that, we cannot serve God. In the same way as if our focus is on God, well then naturally we cannot have our focus on money as well, because money is no longer the goal. Money now is simply a tool. It is a tool that we use in order that we can serve others, in order that we can bless others, in order that we can look after ourselves. But our focus needs to be in the right place. Our focus needs to be on things that last. Otherwise, our perception of life, our perception of our finances, our perception of our possessions is a dim perception. It is not one that is clear, and we do not see our needs and our possessions clearly. We need that light that comes from seeking God first and seeing others clearly so that we may see our own situations clearly. Jesus carries this on, and he carries on the same sort of theme of seeing by talking about really how God has a good eye. God has a good eye because he sees the needs of others. He sees the needs of the birds and the animals, and he feeds them. And if he sees their needs, then surely he will see our needs also, because we are more precious to him than the birds and the beasts. See, God has a good eye. He sees the flowers and he clothes them in beautiful splendor. He says that the flowers are more beautifully clothed than even King Solomon, the rich king who had everything. And yet, God sees the flowers, but we are more precious. We are more precious than the flowers to him. So if he sees them and he cares about them, surely he will care about us. God sees you. God sees me. He knows our needs. He knows the things that we need to survive: food, wealth, housing, relationships. But that is not where our focus should be. These things all come naturally if we don't focus on them, if we don't look at ourselves, but instead we look towards other people and we look towards God. This is not where our focus should be. And these are not things that we need to worry about. We need to have a good eye. See, a good eye will focus on things that last forever. A good eye will focus on treasures in heaven. This is why Jesus says, "Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness." If we put God's kingdom first in our lives, everything else falls into place naturally. And we don't end up giving them a focus that they should not have. So what does it mean to put his kingdom first, or to seek first his kingdom? We hear that in the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What do we focus on first? We focus on God's will being done. God's will being done in our lives and in our communities. When we put that focus first, when we hunger and thirst for righteousness, when we want to be peacemakers, and all these other things that we've been talking about, we don't focus on the material things, and the material things happen naturally. What does it mean to then also seek first his righteousness? It means that we aim for the bullseye. It means that we don't see how far we can go before we get in trouble, but we try to aim for what is right, even if it gets us into trouble. And that's why I think it's so important that Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow. You know, today has enough worries of its own. Is it actually releases us to be able to be generous. It releases us to be able to step into areas of ministry and areas of giving and do what we believe we need to do without worrying so much about the repercussions. For instance, in missions, very, very scary thing. If you have a calling on your life and you believe that God is walking you into a certain area of ministry and all this sort of stuff, yes, we get other people's opinions. Yes, we pray about it. Yes, we think about these things, and we think whether we can finish what we start. This is all very important. But also we don't let ourselves be consumed by worry about where our finances are going to come from, where we're going to live. If God tells us to step out in faith, then we have to believe that He will also provide for us. Because if He sees the birds, if He sees the flowers, surely He sees us. And this is one thing that I'm busy doing at the moment, to tell you the truth, is we're stepping out in faith. Things have the potential to be very tough for us financially at the moment. But we have to seek His kingdom first. We have to seek His righteousness first and do what we believe is the honourable thing to do. And I believe that if God has called us as workers into the harvest field, as He describes in other places in the Bible, well, He will pay His workers. He will look after us. He will take care of us. And I've actually seen that time and time again. I don't want to get into a whole lot of stories now, but at the moment, we don't have a whole lot of money, but at the same time, we are in a position where it looks like we're going to be able to buy our house without ever going to the bank, just because of things lining up. Getting a house with Habitat for Humanity, getting a loan from Liberty Trust, just having everything fall into place. We did look into these things, obviously, but they weren't our focus. Our focus was doing ministry. Our focus was living the way and doing the things that we believed God wanted us to do at that time. And actually everything fell in order for us in a way that we could not have orchestrated ourselves if we were actually trying to orchestrate it. So seek His kingdom first. Focus on things that last forever. Things that last forever is actually the good and the evil that you do. We will be rewarded for the good that we do in life. Things that last forever is your character, the way that you approach situations. This should be our focus. God's will being done in our lives. God's righteousness, God's generosity, God's forgiveness, and all these other things that I talk about every single time I do one of these messages. This should be the focus of our lives, not stuff. Thank you.